to choose from, all within the one platform, and all of the different events as well. So it could be Christmas, or it could be a baby shower, or a christening, or even a bereavement. A lot of people say, instead of gifts, instead of flowers, can you please give to a hospice? And this is a way where the grieving family can actually see that people are making those donations.
Does everything you give go to the charity? Do you as an organisation, do you need to take some for your running costs?
Yeah, like any fundraising for any charity, there's the cost of building the platform that needs to be recovered. So there will be, after people have made their donations, there's the cost for the payment provider, which is standard with credit card transactions, and then an administration fee, which will be 7% to start with.
Of the total? Are you hoping that might reduce over time?
Yeah, absolutely. We're not here to make a profit, we're here to do good. So if we get to a point where we're making profit, then the intention is to reinvest.
You're hoping this might have an environmental impact too? What?
Absolutely.
Less packaging, less Christmas wrapping, and or whatever. But what's that part of it? Are you saying, look, in some instances we are just getting often plastic widgets or gadgets or other stuff that's just clutter?
Yeah, it's everything, Catherine. There's such a movement at the moment around not taking plastic bags from the supermarket, but we still take them when we go to the bookstore or to the store where we're buying those socks or T-shirts that we're giving to somebody, and then all of those socks and T-shirts come with the tags and the wrapping, and then we put them in more wrapping paper and we use sellotape, and then we stick them in the mail and we send them to the other side of the world. And we've seen research which is landfill increases by 50% after Christmas, and it's all of that packaging and just everything that goes along
50 selected charities there already on the platform?
To start with, we've invited 50 charities to be along in the first tranche, and that's so that we can keep things manageable as we test the platform and we launch. And our intention is that we'll get to a point where you want to give your birthday, you choose the charity that matters to you in your neighbourhood, and we can invite them.
Good talking to you. There's a link to information with more on RNZ's webpage. Thanks very much to Christine Langdon, co-founder of the Good Registry. 7 minutes to 10. Mike Field, good morning.
Good morning, Catherine.
A lot of discussion at the moment. I was listening to morning reports, and also it's been on the TV news about this tension in the run-up to tomorrow's Samoa-Tonga Rugby League World Cup match in Hamilton. What's your take on it?
My take is that it's this ridiculous thing that we have in New Zealand, that if one Pacific Islander has an argument with another Pacific Islander, the whole Pacific Island has to get involved in the whole blame game that we go on. Cabinet ministers who would otherwise not get themselves involved in this sort of thing have to be trotted out. And I thought the best example of the best response was Val Adams, who tweeted a picture of a bar with 3 or 4 people marked with a Samoan flag and 3 or 4 people marked with a Tongan flag, and stuck in the middle was a poor Cook Islander. We have a great tendency in New Zealand to, if something happens to 1 or 2 Pacific Islanders, we blame the whole lot. And this is just ridiculous. Teenage, adolescent sports fan. We don't roll out our cabinet ministers when white violence breaks out, so why are we doing it with them? And poor old Jenny Salesi, Tongan, is married to a Samoan, so she's doing her bit. So why don't we just treat it as a bunch of teenage boys who need some guidance?
Thank you. Meanwhile, the political turmoil is happening, and particularly around elections in Tonga, and also some trouble in the Solomons. Let's begin with Tonga.
Well, Tonga goes to an election next week, a general election inspired by the King dissolving Parliament somewhat spectacularly and pushing Akalisi Pohiva, the Prime Minister, out of a job. The whole rugby league thing in Tonga has actually diverted a lot of attention away from the drama up there, and that's possibly a good thing, because there has been some really interesting debate on the powers of the king and what's going to happen. Akalisi Pohiva is running in an electorate with 10 other candidates, so in theory he just has to get the most number of votes than anybody else, and it could only be 10%. And he's regarded as a reasonably good prospect to get back as Prime Minister, which I think will be a bit unfortunate, because I don't think he was a great Prime Minister. And possibly he should take the lead from what happened in New Zealand and start moving down a generation or two. But there's a lot of fishhooks buried away in this thing, and there really does look like the nobles and the royals are kind of manoeuvring to get back into power and to take over the kingdom again. So it's really worth watching. And in the Solomon Islands, the old veteran Prime Minister Manasseh Songavari is facing incredible rebellion in his own ranks, and goes to another no-confidence vote on Monday. A whole lot of people have resigned, but he's reappointed a whole lot of other people, and the tensions are quite high there. And as we all know, it's not too distant from when they had ethnic violence on Guadalcanal, and the regional intervention force has only just left.
Just left, hasn't it? The old RNZ force.
That's right. So it's interesting, although I'm reluctant to sort of say that just because there's a lot of passion, it necessarily means violence. It just looks like it's a very intense scene, and possibly they've got over the violence, and let's try to be optimistic for them.
Indeed. Samoa's Prime Minister, we were talking, has been in New Zealand for medical treatment. He's returned home and had quite a say on experience with one of the airlines.
He's launched against, he had his first press conference yesterday, and he announced, somewhat bizarrely, that there were 4,500 hackers in Samoa, including lawyers and children. I have to say, when you read his statement, it's kind of evident that he doesn't know what a hacker is. But in the meantime, Samoa, which is experiencing quite a boom in air travel, and the numbers that show quite a large number of arrivals from New Zealand are increasing year on year, things like sort of 19% a year, 20%. And Samoa used to have its own airline, Polynesian Airlines, and it got sort of subverted into an arrangement with Virgin Australia. And now Samoa wants a piece of the action, a large piece of the action, and feels that Virgin Australia is abusing them. And for example, if you want to get from Apia to Sydney by Virgin, you have to come through Auckland, arrive at something like 3 o'clock in the morning, and spend 3 hours in the arrival waiting for the connecting flight to Australia. So Tuilaepa has banned Virgin Airlines from selling any tickets on the Auckland-Apia route, and there's about 6,000 passengers floating around seemingly without an airline. But he's getting a lot of support, it would seem. And in the meantime, of course, Air New Zealand, which runs quite a good service now with Dreamliners and daily services and things, no doubt is picking up on it. But the Australians have a bad track record when it comes to servicing Samoa.
Now, the East-West Centre, I've heard plenty from it over the years. Is it getting near the end of its run?
Well,
or
it seems,
one of its services anyway?
Well, one of the best little services, in my view, that it ever ran was a thing called the Pacific Report, which it produced each day, a digest of what's been going on in the media around the Pacific. They've just announced that after 20 years, it's a web-based service, that it's closing up. And apparently there's some hostility by Donald Trump towards this kind of organisation, the East-West Centre, and it's losing its funding, and the Pacific Report's dying. But it's just another example of the way the United States is walking away from the South Pacific. They really don't seem to care about it. And we had this schmozzle with the US ambassador in Samoa as another one. But the good side of it is that I see the new government is proposing that Radio New Zealand International gets a lot more money and can do a lot more in servicing the Pacific. And you lose from one hand and gain on the other.
Well, Radio Australia, of course, they've been having a tough time over there. They canned their shortwave service, or had to, I think, when the funding was cut.
They did indeed. So it's good to see that at least little old New Zealand, although we do seem to pick on Pacific Island Rugby League fans.
Your point is taken, Mike. Thank you, Michael Field. It is nearly 10. You are listening to 9 to Noon. Our guest next, the British author Catherine Hewitt, on the dramatic story of Renoir's muse, Suzanne Valadon, an artist in her own right.
RNZ News at 10. Good morning, I'm Nicola Wright. Fire and Emergency now says both of the devastating fires that burned Christchurch's Port Hills in February were suspicious. Two separate fires, several kilometres apart, started on February the 13th. The first on Early Valley Road and the second on Marley's Hill. As well as the latest on the causes, an independent review of how emergency services responded to fires has been released. Maya Burry reports.
A helicopter pilot died fighting the fires, which merged into one large blaze that destroyed 9 homes and forced thousands of people to evacuate their properties. In July, the police launched a criminal investigation after the cause of the Marley's Hill fire was found to be suspicious. Now, Fire and Emergency says, based on the information available, it's of the view that the Early Valley Road fire is also suspicious. But it says there is insufficient evidence to definitively conclude the cause, so the official finding has been ruled as undetermined, pending new information. An independent review of how emergency services responded to the fires, released this morning, has identified several shortcomings, including a lack of communication with Port Hills residents threatened by the fires. This is Maya Burry.
A Tongan community leader is working to ease tensions between league fans that have led to several violent brawls in South Auckland. Last night, 6 people were arrested after 200 Samoan and Tongan rugby league supporters. Last month. The chanting crowd has called Spain the shame of Europe, and more demonstrations are expected in the days ahead. Here's the BBC's James Reynolds.
They will call for the immediate release of their politicians. To them, these are political prisoners. These are not potential criminals. They say these men were simply carrying out their jobs here in the Generalitat, the Catalan political headquarters. But just standing back a bit, it is a stunning reversal of fortune in recent days. On Friday,
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rhys Jones. I'm the Chief Executive of Fire and Emergency New Zealand. We're an organisation that was formed on the 1st of July, partially to fix many of the problems that have arisen from the report that we're now dealing with. But we'll get on with that later on in our presentation. It's probably appropriate for us to start with remembering the family of Steve Aston, the helicopter pilot who died in the response agency. Our sympathies remain with his family. And remembering the dedicated work that he did. Can also remember and emphasise our support for those families that lost their homes, the 9 homes that were lost, as well as those that had their property damaged. We met with many of them last night and briefed them on the report, and were able to have good discussions around what came out of those reports and some of the issues that caused the damage to their homes. Before I get into the context, it's probably useful to talk about why the 3 of us are here. So I'm Rhys Jones, the Chief Executive. My responsibility is to ensure that the recommendations of this report are implemented in the new organisation.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Richard McNamara. I'm the Regional Manager of Rural for this organisation. I was brought down to this fire after the tragic death of Steve Askin in my normal role as an aviation specialist in fire. I spent 3 days doing that, and then from the Thursday on I was incident controller on the fire. I've had over 25 years of fighting fires like this in New Zealand, Australia and the United States, and this fire was something that is unprecedented in New Zealand in terms of its impact.
Kia ora koutou everyone, my name's Sam Broughton, I'm the Mayor of Selwyn District, and the reason I'm here is because under the old rules, rural fires were dealt with by district councils, city councils and the Department of Conservation, and the Early Valley fire started in Selwyn District territory, and that's why it was handled from the Selwyn District. Just like to reiterate the condolences to the Askin family and thank them for Steve's efforts in fighting this fire for our city and for our district. And again mention those that lost their homes. But this has been a traumatic event, not only for those directly impacted, but those that could see the fires burning on our Port Hills. And yeah, we just remember last summer and look to now implement the things that are in this report to make sure that we learn what we can from it and don't repeat the same mistakes, but also protect our city, protect our homes and protect life this coming fire season.
Thank you. So it's probably useful that we start with the context of the Port Hills fire. What was it about and why was it so significant for us? This was, although not the largest forest fire we'd had, certainly the most complex. It was on the edge of the city. It spanned the jurisdiction of 3 firefighting authorities, the Selwyn District, Christchurch City, and also the Department of Conservation. Its magnitude was quite amazing. Over 1,600 hectares was burnt. That's 1,600 rugby fields, for those who want to imagine that size. The power of the forest fire, 100,000 kilowatts. That's about 3 atomic bombs worth of energy that was being released by that fire. It was an extremely rugged terrain and moving very quickly, faster than you could run. So the difficulty there would be if we were putting firefighters into some of that difficult circumstances, we would have been signing their death warrant. And so the major aspect of this was the decision making at the time had to be in the face of uncertainty, of a fast moving disaster event, and disasters by its own definition are things that overwhelm the normal structure of how we respond. Therefore it really drove a priority of our decision making. Safety first, safety of the community, but also safety of those who were fighting the fires as well. And many of the issues that came out of this report were based on the decisions taken at the time were at that priority. Sometimes they led to unfortunate circumstances where houses were left in the path of the fire because we were having the safety of our responders as the first consideration. But it's also, let's recognise that during disasters, mistakes are made. And this report highlights some of the mistakes that were made. We own those recommendations in the report and we accept all the statements about where things were done wrong. But the aim of the report was to examine the operational capability and how we did respond and what lessons could we learn. Because the bottom line to the whole event was this is probably going to happen again. Climate change is affecting New Zealand as it's affecting other places around the world. And although this was the most complex to date, there will be complex fires close to cities, close to other rural towns in the future, and we need to learn our lessons of how we adapt and how we improve our response systems to be able to cope with them. And had no axe to grind or no agenda to fill, he could come and look clinically at it. He is a very well-respected person in the forest fire area throughout the Asia-Pacific area and has a lot of experience in Australia as well as Canada and the United States and through the Pacific. His report focused on how we responded, the command and control, the response on the ground, the community liaison, and the follow-up actions that went through that as well. There were 2 main themes that have come out in the recommendations, and to summarise, I'll just cluster those together. The first is the need for us to have a greater community focus on our response. And the second is the need for a far more coordinated approach across all of the response agencies, but particularly within the fire services. So in terms of the community approach and community engagement, this is not just about during a fire, but it's also prior to any emergency that we're dealing with, in this case a wildfire. The need for the public to be engaged with the response or emergency plans, be it fire, be it tsunami, be it earthquakes and so on, that people know what to do to reduce the risk, about cutting vegetation back, about not building their homes too close to sources of fuel for the fire, It's also about the warning system. How were people alerted to the dangers going through? At that time, we didn't have a national alert system that could be effective. That's one of the things that have been highlighted, and it's one of those things that are now being rectified. Also, during the emergency, there was probably a lack of understanding that information needed to be taken from the firefighting decisions and then pushed back out to the public. An example of that was the cordons that were stopping people moving up the road didn't really know the reason why those cordons were in place. And it would have helped with the public information flow if people had known why they couldn't get back to their homes, when it was safe to be able to move in there, or what information was going around. So certainly far better information flow to the communities at the planning level and to councils, but also to the individual levels, was a very strong recommendation that came out of that report. And lastly, also the information flow afterwards, making sure that people are aware of what happened, that they have visibility of the review, and that's what drove the engagement that we took as Fire and Emergency into this report and the support we have given and continue to give to those who are affected by it. In terms of the coordinated response, one of the issues with this fire was that the structure of the fire response was built around smaller forest fires that were going to be locally contained, were within the boundaries of perhaps one fire district, whereas, as I've already mentioned, this covered 3 fire jurisdictions. The coordinated approach of having rehearsed the high-end contingencies, the coordinated approach of having similar or having identical command processes where we're using the same language, where people understood the processes or the planning and the orders cycle that went out there, there was some confusion in that, and our strong recommendation is that one system is set up in place, that there is better coordination, that there is certification of what qualifications people have, so that we can all trust, we all understand the language, we can all work together in pre-planned, rehearsed styles of operation to respond to any emergency, be it fire, be it flood, be it a pandemic, be it an earthquake. So where are we now, and how are these recommendations going to be working? Well, the first big change is that the old structure about how emergencies are dealt with has been changed. During the Porter's fire, there was already a discussion in Parliament and in the emergency response sector about the need to have just one fire service as a responder. And so that discussion was already going on because it was recognised that these issues were too big for the current structure. As of the 1st of July, the Fire and Emergency New Zealand was created to solve that biggest problem, and that is the coordination amongst the previous 2 fire services, the rural and the urban branches. What this now creates is one command system, the ability for those responders on the ground to be united in how we respond to all those organisations, and a far greater capability for us as an organisation to work with the other responder agencies, Department of Conservation, Civil Defence, the local councils, to have a much stronger ability to get information from the fire site out into the communities. So that's kind of the organisational structure, but there are also things that we're doing at a far more practical level to make us ready for this next fire season. We are going through the rehearsals with the other agencies we'll work with through the contingencies that we're identifying with the fire season. What are the things that are happening in each of the local areas that might be the big risks? Talking through the contingencies, talking through the likelihoods of what might happen. We are engaging far more strongly with the individual communities around there about the risks in the area and talking to them about how might that risk be reduced by cutting back on some of the vegetation, by ensuring that safety processes are in place, that they're aware what to do during a fire around the area. And Mac might cover several of those things later on. So there's also the aspect of the attitude change of people in fire and emergency. We now own this issue. And whereas before parts of the response organisations, fire or civil defence or others could say, okay, this is my part, but others have other responsibility, certainly within fire and emergency, we now all own our total response. And as I said, we agree, we accept the findings of the report, and we're determined to make sure that those organisational structure issues are addressed. But we also recognise that humans are in the loop, and that mistakes may still be made the next time we respond to it. But we want to be an organisation and a country that learns from those lessons, that actually puts in place those rectifications. And that's the whole aim of this report, is to learn those lessons, to lay them out, to own them, to be public about them, and to then be held accountable for making sure we address those issues. Can I close by perhaps giving a final message to New Zealand as a whole? We're a country that's pretty used to earthquakes, to volcanic eruptions, to tsunamis and floods. Well, we need to add wildfires to this risk. Climate change is having an effect on us, particularly in the dryland east coast areas. We need to be as aware of what are those things that we need to do as a country to reduce that threat and be able to respond to that. It's not a reliance on the central fire agencies only. Councils can do a lot about reducing the threat, about thinking about the developments that they're doing, about putting into their regional plans requirements that are going to keep people safe. But individuals also can do many things around their own property to keep them safe and to understand what their obligations are or opportunities are to help during that circumstance. We all need to own this problem as a country, because it is now becoming far more prevalent, and it will happen again. I'll now open the floor for questions, and so the floor is yours.
Can you just talk about the cause of the Valley fire and the investigation into that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll answer that question. I'll start with the simpler fire, which was Marley's Hill. The cause of that is suspicious. It's in the hands of the police. There was 2 fires. Marley's Hill occurred roughly over an hour later. The cause of that fire is suspicious. It is with the police. That investigation's ongoing. The Early Valley fire has consumed a lot of our time. We had firefighters on this fire for 66 days. Up until today, our investigators have still been working on this fire. The conclusion is that the fire is classified as undetermined as such, but our view is that it was caused by a deliberately lit fire.
And so until further information comes forward, essentially nothing more can be done with that. It can't be passed on to the police.
No, the police. We've been working with the police since day 2 of this fire in terms of the investigation on both fire starts. The police are still heavily involved with this, but at this point in time, most, if not all, of the forensic evidence that can be found has been found and factored into our investigation report's findings. What we still need, though, is information that's still out there with the public, whether it be photos, imagery from cell phones, or indeed the conversations that have occurred since the fire. Anything that the public and the community in those areas would deem in any way relevant at all to this fire, we need to know. And they can contact the police, they can contact us, they can talk to the community leaderships and the councils. We need more information to further define it. As I said, our view, given the electrical engineering report we've had done, given the fire behaviour work that's been going on, given the forensic examinations both by us and the police, and the interviews that we've conducted with people on site, says that it's likely to be a deliberately lit fire. We just need that extra evidence to further define that particular outcome. I know it's frustrating for people when a bureaucrat stands up and says it's undetermined, but our role is to continue that work hand in hand with the police to get to the point of truth. Now, that's not easy when we don't have anyone saying it started here. We have to model it. We have to determine where it started, when it started, and what were the likely factors. And so we're appealing for ongoing help in that regard. As a fire manager and as a incident controller that came in after the Wednesday, I can say that we fully accept the recommendations and the outcomes and the recommendations from this report. But what I also will say is that the firefighters on the ground worked as hard as they ever could to stem this fire. We're in an invidious situation as leaders and managers in an incident such as this. Our job is to put people in harm's way. but we also have to get them home. And tragically, one of our own didn't come home. And we also accept that when we do that, there will be losses at times, but there is no acceptable losses. But as a fire incident controller, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, I will never trade bricks and mortar for lives. We will push our people to the safety limits. We will work as hard as we can, and if you saw the outcomes of some of the firefighting efforts, you'll understand that. But at the same time, myself and others in these positions have to make the difficult call, is when do we commit and when do we pull our firefighters back? And I absolutely back the decisions that were made on the fireground at that time. Having said that, there were disconnects. There were times when the information flow from the fireground to the planning intelligence section of our incident management team, and importantly, back out to the public, was not good. We have to do better. The failure that we will enact, the absolute failure we'll enact as an organisation, is if we don't learn these lessons and don't take up the recommendations from this review report.
So, and if I can back that up, the complexities of this, the magnitude of it meant that the decision making was taken under extreme pressure to understand the environments, and so in the coldness of hindsight, we can examine it and say, all right, let's learn our lessons about how we could do that. Experience is often gained by making mistakes and learning from that. So we do accept mistakes of individuals, mistakes collectively in the planning process were made in there, and we've accepted those. We've passed that on to the families. That was a large part of our discussion last night, and we are owning those mistakes there. So those are lessons that are learned as individuals who were part of that process, but organisationally as well. So we can then pass those lessons on to others who might be in similar circumstances in the future. So mistakes were made.
About the complexities, the scale of it, the magnitude, and the extreme pressure that decision making is put under. You have to take that into account. But shouldn't we have already learned from February 2011? 6 years earlier, we had an extreme situation and we had massive communication breakdown with a major issue. So shouldn't we have already learned those lessons?
The issue with this is that it was and we should have. I agree that those lessons need to be learned and relearned at times. And if you look overseas, if you look at what's happened in the Napa Valley just recently, we're on a smaller scale, but the same phenomenon is in place with a whole lot of agencies ultimately trying to do their very best and come together in an incident that broaches boundaries, broaches social boundaries, broaches the amount of resource that we could actually throw at the thing. This thing was accelerating faster than we could throw resource at it. And I accept we have to learn those lessons. And as I said earlier, the failure for us now, right now, is if we don't pick up on those lessons learned and embed those in our operating philosophies and cultures as we step out with Fire and Emergency New Zealand.
An example of that is some of the issues about the coordination were that we were implementing, or as the emergency response sector, we're learning the lessons and implementing some of the changes in the processes. There was that slight disconnect of, okay, one part of the process was being changed and it wasn't quite connecting with others. So that caused a confusion over what is the terminology, what is the process of how we're doing that. So it was at any moment in time caught in that change. But it was continues to be an environment where we will learn every time, we will do those improvements. We've now learned that lesson on, but that was probably a real crucial problem there about that coordination of how our systems work.
Our incident management teams in the country are designed for wildfire. They're designed for large forest fires. I come from Marlborough. We had a similar experience up in Marlborough in the last 2 years with very large forest fires. They were dealt with, but they were dealt with in the context that they were in a wildland landscape, and yes, sure, they were affecting one or two properties in very small communities. This fire broached boundaries, and it broached into an urban community, and that's the first for New Zealand. And if we don't learn the lessons from this, we'll continue to make the mistakes, and that would be the ultimate failure for us.
Because if we think about our cities around New Zealand, Christchurch, the Garden City, Wellington, which is spreading up into the Hutt Valley, Auckland and the suburbs like Titirangi. There is a real issue for us to learn those lessons about how you fight those type of fires at the edge of an urban environment, or even amongst it as well. Our first time in New Zealand of doing this, and many lessons to learn. Many mistakes were made because we just didn't know how to do that. But again, I emphasise what Max said. Strongly out of the report is emphasising how dedicated and how good the firefighters were on the ground. Yes, mistakes were made about where they were doing their activities in some occasions. But yeah, can we recognise also the amazing effort of people over that entire time? The fact that with that intensity of operations that more houses weren't lost is something that we can also say, okay, well, that was their focus. No lives in the community were lost because that became their priority. So, yeah, an opportunity for us to learn, an opportunity for us to accept the mistakes and to constantly look at that and not whitewash, not try and hide it. But it was also a good time for us as a new organisation, Fire and Emergency, to learn something new that we were formed to be able to respond to. And so that's why we are so open to identifying what those issues were as individual people, as an organisation, and really putting them into play.
And I think that's one of the lessons actually from the earthquake sequence of 2010, 2011, is that we now have Fire and Emergency New Zealand. And so we were dealing with quite a different event through the fires compared to the earthquake, but actually as a country we're learning and we're putting something new in place, and Fire and Emergency New Zealand will make sure that, that these things are held in one organisation and work together.
Do you accept that residents who were evacuated should have been given more warning and a longer chance to get their belongings out?
Yeah, Ali, I accept that. I accept the fact that our information flow from the fireground through the various commanders that were doing their best. The information flow around how the fire was progressing, what danger it faced, the people faced. That information coming back into an incident management team that could then get it out to our community wasn't good. And we just simply have to learn that lesson. And unfortunately, if you look globally, these are lessons that have to be learned and relearned, because every incident, every emergency is dynamic, and this one was highly dynamic, and they require different approaches. The other thing I would like to add, though, we've talked about the resilience of our firefighters and the sheer courage and work that they did. I also want to acknowledge the people of Christchurch, and particularly the communities that had to face this catastrophic event. Of all the cities to have impacted with something such as this, why Christchurch? Christchurch has suffered in the last 5 years untold misery, and this just heaped it on it. And as I said, our job is to support those communities. We're here to support and serve our communities in times of need. If you strip away all the technical aspects of firefighting and emergency response and incident management teams, our role is to prevent or mitigate suffering in our community. And to a large degree, I believe we did that. Can we do better? Of course we can. And if we don't relearn those lessons, then we will fail our communities, and I won't stand for that.
There's now only one agency. There is no rural and urban anymore, so Fire and Emergency, that they united, the singular command structure is now in place to cover that.
It's us.
Yeah, this is a question for you, Mr. Jones. The fire service would have done its own internal reports and reviews. Now, will they be made public? And also, did any of your conclusions differ from Mr. Goodwin's report?
We only did very immediate post-action reports. We were relying on Alan Goodwin's report as an outsider to say, well, you come and have a look at how we operated in here. So, that's what we've relied on.
Will those reports, immediate reports, be released, be available to the media or to the public?
Yes.
Yeah, they will be. Right.
We did as Reece said, we did an immediate debrief, as is the case with any incident. You do a debrief, an operational debrief. That I believe that was held out at Selwyn District Council. I would think that stuff has been already released, but I'll refer to Sam on that one.
Yeah, well, if they can be released, they will be released to you. There's nothing to hide. We're here to actually own our mistakes and look to work forward on it.
All right, and Mac, you would know that on the Thursday, Wednesday was the day. Thursday things were pretty much under control, but in the morning on Worsley Road, one of the houses went up. It was intact on Wednesday, and it went up on Thursday. Now you've obviously spoken to the families about that. What have you said to them about that?
I've said to them that our firefighters did the best we could. There was some question around helicopter support for that, but our helicopters, remember, they've been working since the Monday on that fire. They're doing 14-hour days. They lifted again before first light. They were over on the fire ground getting prepared at the same time that unfortunately we lost that house. So our aerial support was there as quickly as it could. Some people have made the connection, well, could you have got those aircraft there earlier? You can talk to the pilots about this, but as a air division manager for fires, I can tell you that they were there as quickly as we could get them.
So in terms of the families that have lost their houses, have you apologised to any of them in terms of, because I gather that Mr Jones almost conceded that some houses could have been saved if some of these mistakes weren't made. So have any of the families been selected as deserving apology?
Yes, we have. And that was sessions we had yesterday.
How many families were talking about?
The two families in particular, we've given that to the house you're talking about, but also another house where perhaps some decisions also post-fire about clearing that ground. I was also apologising to them as well. So this, I suppose, becomes the awkwardness of in a disaster where the focus is in certain places where we're accepting those mistakes, and that was why we brought them in last night, talked them through why was this occurred, what mistakes were made, so they understood that, and we apologise.
Well, we all understand that mistakes were made, and we all appreciate the effort fighters put in, but the point is that, as Kurt mentioned, a lot of mistakes were made in 2011, and so we have to keep harping on about them. But the other issue that, and I haven't read the whole report very carefully yet, but one of the issues that did arise, and that was very important, was the availability of helicopters very early on in the piece of the Early Valley Road fire. Now, I think there was one helicopter, or two helicopters available in all of Christchurch, and I know that other helicopters were brought in quickly. But what is being done to ensure that if there was a fire that took hold in very dry conditions very rapidly, how do we know, how can we be confident that there are going to be enough helicopters on standby, ready to go? Because that's one of the crucial points.
Yeah, it is. And
is it in the report, by the way? Is it mentioned, Alan mentioned that?
No, because it's kept at a high level, but I can answer the questions around helicopter availability. Knew he was facing a rapidly expanding event. He ordered more tankers and he ordered two helicopters. Those two helicopters dispatched straight away. Fortunately, shall I say, one of them noticed and quickly identified the fact that there were people trapped above the rapidly advancing fire. So instead of putting on his monsoon bucket and getting to work, and to be honest, I would doubt if he could have ever stopped that fire anyway, given the way it was running, he went in and saved those people and brought them out. So we're never ever going to criticise him for making that decision. It was entirely the right decision. In the wider context, your question is are we doing something about that in terms of having more aircraft available? We're talking with the helicopter companies right now about how we do that in terms of heli response, not only to a fire on the Port Hills, but to in the wider Canterbury region. We did have that system in place. It's very basic system. We are now upgrading that with the local companies.
I'm just conscious of time. I won't give you the opportunity of one-on-one, so we'll wrap up here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Evan.
Questions,
Yep. Happy to do the one-on-ones, guys. Thank you.
Well, despite his problems.
It is a fascinating story. Thank you very much for spending so much time with us this morning, Catherine. Thank you. Catherine Hewitt is the author of the book that we have just been discussing, Renoir's Dancer, The Secret Life of Suzanne Valadon. And there are images of Suzanne as a model, but also of her own art in our gallery on the webpage radionz.co.nz/9 to noon, where you can also get details of the book. 23 minutes to 11 on 9 to noon. Speaking of books, time to welcome Karen Dath of Unity Books Auckland. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Catherine.
Rebecca Solnit's book, it's one of those cases where it's dangerous at the moment to be trying to write non-fiction or any kind of observational thesis because events are moving so fast. What do we have here with The Mother of All Questions, or the subtitle Further Reports from the Feminist Revolutions by Rebecca Solnit?
By now, I would hope that everyone has read Men Explain Things to Me by Rebecca Solnit, but this new Solnit collection of essays is subtitled Further Feminisms, and it's the perfect follow-up to the previous collection. The two collections complement each other really beautifully. But who is Solnit? She's a kicker of hornets' nests, really. She's a prominent essayist, feminist, human rights advocate, social and cultural critic, and she's just a really leading and important voice. And, you know, I've actually read several of her books, and whether she's writing about feminism, politics, geography, landscape, everything is pitch perfect, brilliant. So the essays collected here were composed, I think, between 2014 and 2016, and like Further Feminisms suggest, they focus on feminism, and in particular, silence and empathy and the silencing of women. So there are two sections, and each have, I think, 6 essays, and in Solnit's succinct style, they weave together personal anecdote, case studies, and social and cultural critique, which she does so well. They're personal, they're political, and they're pertinent, really. They're really pertinent to our times, as you kind of alluded in your intro. So the opening essay, A Short History of Silence, opens with Solnit giving a talk about Virginia Woolf. And in the Q&A session afterwards, she noticed that the subject that interested the audience the most was whether Woolf should have had children or not. And Solnit writes about Woolf's description of murdering the angel in the house, which, you know, is the subservient inner voice that she pushed down. And she says that while many people make babies, only one person made to the lighthouse. And Solnit herself has no children and is constantly questioned about this. And she talks about that in the essay. So I think really what these essays are sort of a necessary backlash against stealth misogyny and what she calls dog whistle conservatism, and that they're just freighted with conviction and a revitalised kind of urgency and inclusiveness. I think that's really important too. Her feminism is open to everybody because it's not just feminism, it's human rights.
Is there an optimism? Are we in a polemical mood, or are we in an optimistic mood? Mix? What's the tone?
I don't think she's pessimistic, and I don't think she's cynical. I think she just writes with a very cool clarity. But every now and then a line will jump out at you, and it's a barbed, spiky, kind of necessary outburst. But it's all very measured and precise. And I don't think she's preaching people, to persuade people to believe in a certain kind of way of thinking. I think she's actually more encouraging people who already do believe in these kind of human rights and feminisms that, to be more actively engaged. Yeah, the themes I think are really interesting, silence and quiet and the differences between them. She writes about silence as white noise and the differences between silence and quiet. Silence is imposed and quiet is what is sought. And she also, I just love her writing about empathy, and I think it's really kind of pertinent to our times, how empathy in society is crucial. That empathy is sort of a narrative that we tell ourselves to make other people real to us. And thereby, by doing that, we extend and open ourselves. And to be without empathy is to sort of shut down or kill off some part of yourself and your humanity to sort of protect yourself from some kind of vulnerability. And she sort of likens that to soldiers and their kind of training, which is really interesting.
There's another interesting observation in the context of what's happening at the moment, and I'm thinking about the Weinstein and subsequent events, and sort of like it feels like, a wall has broken, right? But she writes a sentence, silence forever being broken, and then like waves lapping over the footprints, the sand castles and washed up shells and seaweed, silence rises again. And it's an interesting warning, is it? Whether it's the EU and UK political structures under pressure at the moment with revelations or accusations, or indeed, as we said, with what's happening in Hollywood. It's never fully achieved progress, is it? It's achieved and then the risk is it recedes. Or as she says, the silence comes back again.
The silence comes back again, and she sort of talks about it in terms of being like, I guess like a diagnosis and then treatment and then a cure, and kind of working through it that way. But this is concrete anecdotal storytelling,